He said the cabin was dead weight and that a quick sale would set us up. I found a draft listing with my signature forged, a fake power of attorney, and a buyer ready to wire a deposit. The cabin sits on 2 acres off County Road 41, about 25 minutes outside Santa Fe, New Mexico, GPS 35 6624N 105 8927W. It's rough around the edges but clean and square. A one-room timber box my father framed in 1991 with a loft bed, a wood-burning stove, and a screened porch where moths stutter like small paper hearts against the lantern glass. My father, Nolan Carter, died on February 7, 2023 at 10:14 p.m. at Christus St. Vincent. I still have the discharge forms folded into a rectangle the size of a matchbox. I am 33, an architect who restores adobe facades for a firm on Cerrillos Road. My father was a carpenter who measured twice and cut once, usually while whistling out-of-tune hymns. Brandon Pierce was 35, a tech recruiter who could talk anyone into a bigger salary or a fixed-gear bike they didn't need. He uses compliments like a locksmith uses picks. We met in a Saturday ceramics studio at Make Santa Fe. He extruded coils, I built slabs, and by week 3 he'd charmed the studio manager into giving him extra kiln space. That was the first flag I recognized only later. He felt entitled to whatever wasn't nailed down. He proposed on a windy evening in April 2024 on Canyon Road, outside a gallery that sold porcelain bowls for $680 and labeled them sculptures. The ring was a square-cut moissanite in a recycled gold bezel, size 6. We set a wedding date, June 14, 2025, at the Randall Davey Audubon Center. Money: I make $86,000 plus a 5% bonus if our projects hit preservation milestones. Brandon said he made low sixes, which meant, I eventually learned, $104,000 including commissions that varied like the weather. I own a beige 2012 Subaru Outback with 143,000 miles and the roof paint peeling. Brandon leases a black Audi A4 at $619 per month, insurance $242. We split rent 60-40 on a 2-bedroom near Agua Fria, $2,150. The cabin was mine outright, deed recorded by the Santa Fe County Clerk on March 2, 2023, instrument number 2213956. My father left me a letter aligned with the left margin as if made with a T-square. L, keep it simple, keep it yours. At first, Brandon framed the cabin as an escape. He bought a Stanley thermos, shivered through our first autumn night, and called the coyotes smart dogs. He posted a photo of the stove to Instagram with a caption, "Unplugging is the new plug." But winter hit, propane climbed, and he lost 2 big clients in January. Our conversations tightened into numbers. He asked what the cabin was actually worth. I said comps were weird out here, $280,000 to $335,000, depending on how much of the acreage a buyer considered usable. He nodded so eagerly I stopped mid-sentence. He hid his eagerness under a soft opinion. The cabin was romantic but inefficient. He started driving out on weekdays while I was at site visits in El Dorado and Pajuaca. I didn't suspect anything because I wanted not to. Then on March 12, 2025, I found an open tab on his iPad, a draft listing on a site called Canyon Vista Properties. It showed my cabin staged with a blanket that wasn't mine and a bowl of green apples that looked like they'd been copied from a catalogue. The text described a turnkey artist's retreat, 25 minutes to Santa Fe Plaza, and listed the parcel as vacant upon closing. The agent was Marla G., and her number ended with 4419. There was a PDF attached, a power of attorney naming Brandon as attorney-in-fact for me, signed Elena C. Carter, notarized by Notary Public J. Ortiz, commission expiring 080428. I have never used Elena C. in my life. He came home with carne adobada and a bottle of Tempranillo, humming. I put the printouts on the table between the tortillas and the forks. He read the first page, set his jaw, and tried to warm his voice into sympathy. "It's just a mock-up," he said. "I wanted to see what we could get. I'm trying to help us. By forging my name. I didn't forge anything." That's what he said, even as the signature looked like a second grader tracing a road with their finger. Marla said we needed to move fast, like the market's tightening. She knows a buyer, Cash from Denver, who wants to close in 30 days. We could put 50 grand into the wedding and the rest into a down payment on something in town. It's dead weight, L. Dead weight. He said it 3 times that week, like practice. I told him to stay away from the cabin. He replied that as my fiancé, he had equitable interest. He looked at me like I was naive for not knowing that phrase. I told him there was no such thing until marriage, and even then, not without my consent on separate property. He called me legalistic. I tucked the forged power of attorney into a plastic sleeve like a specimen. On March 14th, he threw an engagement party at La Reina, a bar at the El Rey Court. He invited everyone, his cycling friends from the rail trail, a pair of founders he'd placed engineers for, 2 of my co-workers, and his cousin Serena, who lives in Albuquerque and runs a lash studio called Wink Wink. He wanted to make a toast, he said, about us growing up. The invitation said 7 p.m. At 7:40, when the mezcal had made my colleagues giggle, he did the thing. He stood on a bench. He thanked everyone for coming. He held my hand like a cuff. He announced that we were transitioning out of the hobbyist cabin because adulthood is trade-offs. He said I was so attached to childhood that it was cute. He said a buyer had already wired an earnest money deposit and that, by June, we'll be smart enough to have liquid assets. I don't remember setting my glass down. I do remember that the light in La Reina is warm and forgiving and that every face suddenly looked like a painting of its own awkwardness. I heard one of his friends say, smart. I heard Serena say, finally. I looked at my co-workers, who were caught between the impulse to nod and the impulse to not be complicit. I took the mic from him, not rudely, just firmly. The cabin isn't for sale, I said. No one has my consent to sell it. Any document that says otherwise is forged. I have notes and screenshots and will be filing a police report in the morning. His smile hardened. He whispered, don't do this in front of everybody. You already did. We left in separate cars. At home he paced while I opened my laptop. I sent myself everything I'd found. The draft listing, the forged PDF, the emails between him and Marla G that I could access because he'd saved the password in Chrome. I created an encrypted folder labeled Sketchbook 2022 to hide it somewhere he wouldn't look. I took photos of his notebook where he'd written Elena sign practice with the loop of the L wrong every time. The timestamps 6:38 a.m., March 5, 6:41 a.m., March 5. The notebook still smelled faintly of the coffee he'd spilled. At 8:26 the next morning, I called the Santa Fe County clerk. They confirmed no power of attorney had been recorded under my name. At 9:02, I called the New Mexico Notary Public Administrator's office. There is a J. Ortiz, but the commission number on the PDF belonged to someone named Maria Alvarez, who retired in 2022. I printed confirmations. At 10:13, I drove to the Santa Fe Police Department on Alta Vista. I handed a desk sergeant named Rangel a neatly stapled packet labeled Suspected Forgery, Attempted Real Property Fraud. He raised one eyebrow at the tab dividers and wrote the case number on the top sheet, SFPD 25031489. He told me to change the cabin locks, keep all communication in writing, and speak to a real estate attorney. If he shows up, call us, he said. Don't argue at the driveway. I bought a 4-pack of Kwikset Smart Key locks at Lowe's on Zaffarano for $89.98, plus a bolt and a new strike plate. I drove to the cabin, installed the deadbolt with my father's old chisel. In the kitchen drawer, I found a copy of the forged power of attorney, folded 3 ways. I took photos of the drawer before and after. At 1:47 p.m., my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown Denver number. It said, "Hi Elena, this is Jeff. I'm excited about the cabin. I wired $5,000 to Canyon Vista as earnest money. Can we do an inspection this Saturday?" I wrote back exactly once. No property of mine is for sale. Please direct all communication to my counsel. I didn't yet have counsel, but I would. Brandon ramped up persuasion into pressure. He said I was self-sabotaging. He said we had big plans. He said a house on Camino Cabra had just hit the market at $795,000, and that if we dithered, we'd miss our window. When he realized I wouldn't bend, he tried humiliation. He called my co-workers and told them I was unstable around money. He told his cousin I'd threatened to have him arrested for planning a future. He told anyone who would listen that the cabin had termites the size of cats. He said my father hadn't paid taxes in years, which wasn't true. I have the receipts, 2,493. 18 in annual property tax paid on 12/1/124, transaction number 554862, check ending in 2419. I made my reaction boring. I asked for a separate bedroom for 2 weeks to cool off. I built a spreadsheet named Boundary Sheet and wrote 3 columns: date, contact, content. March 15th, 4:06 p.m. Call from Brandon. Can we do dinner and talk? I replied by text. Please use email for anything you need to discuss. March 16th, 11:22 a.m. Text from Serena. Babe, don't be dramatic. Reply, please direct communications about me to me directly. Thank you. March 17th, 7:31 a.m. Email from Marla G. Subject line friendly clarification. We were acting under authority presented by your fiancé. We are withdrawing the listing. I saved it, printed it, and forwarded it to the SFPD detective who'd been assigned, a woman named Ojeda, with a voice like a ceramic mug, warm but solid. On March 18th, I met with an attorney named Benita Castellanos at 203 E Palace Avenue, Suite 208. Her intake form asked me to describe the problem in 500 words or less. I kept it under 300. She asked a few brisk questions, then outlined the steps. File a cease and desist to the brokerage and any purported buyers. Record a notice of interest in the cabin so title companies would see a red flag if anyone tried to push a sale. Consider a temporary restraining order if Brandon trespassed or harassed. Her retainer was $3,000. I paid with my debit card. It felt like buying a lock for my own heir. He escalated anyway. He drove to the cabin on March 21st and parked in the turnout across the road. He didn't come up the drive. He sat with the engine off. A neighbor named Mrs. Klein texted me, "Black sedan parked by your gate for an hour." I called SFPD. A patrol car swung through. By the time the officer arrived, the Audi was gone. I added it to the sheet. I purchased a 179 Wi-Fi trail cam from REI and mounted it on an oak facing the gate. On March 24th at 9:03 p.m., the camera pinged my phone, a figure in a hoodie at the lock, then shuffling footsteps. The new deadbolt did its job. I sent the clip to Detective Ojeda. She emailed, "Understood, documenting." My friends divided. 2 of them, Hannah and Malik, came over with enchiladas and sangria and insisted on a living room picnic. They told me that people show you who they are when you say no to them. They helped me pack a box of Brandon's stuff: cycling shoes, a drawer of performance socks, a leather card case embossed BP. Hannah wrote with a Sharpie on the box, "Pierce." He texted at 12:17 a.m. Wow, so petty and spiteful. I didn't reply. Silence isn't maturity for everyone, but it was the only way to keep my hand steady. When I served him with a notice from Benita on March 26th, he laughed in the frame of the front door and said, "You think paper will stop me?" He tried to step inside. I said, "Brandon, you no longer live here." He glanced over my shoulder like he might still walk through me. I kept my voice low and calm. "If you step in, I will call the police. They have our case number." His eyes flicked, calculating, then he stepped back with a dramatic bow that would have played well on a bad stage. He took the box and the card case and left his arrogance on the porch like a wet umbrella. 2 days later, he tried something new: sincerity. He emailed a long note with a subject line in lowercase, like a whisper. He said he was scared of getting older without assets. He said he grew up watching his mother pawn jewelry after his father left, and that feeling stuck to him like old smoke. He said he loved me, and that sometimes love made people clumsy. He said the cabin was just wood and glass, and I was the real home. He wrote that he'd go to therapy. I printed it and placed it chronologically in the folder and didn't write back. Love doesn't draft powers of attorney in someone else's name. Love doesn't call your memories dead weight. The fallout widened. Brandon convinced 2 mutual friends to host a mediated conversation. When I declined, he framed it as fear. He posted a story that said, "Invest in partners who can invest in their future." No names. Santa Fe's scene is small, people guessed. I started seeing faces I knew in the cereal aisle turn toward the freezers, embarrassed for me or for themselves. I kept going to the cabin on Saturdays and Sundays, even when the wind tore the porch screen and the stove smoked. I made lists of small repairs, replace the porch latch, sand and oil the countertops, label the canning jars. My father's handwriting looked back at me from masking tape. Screws, twine, don't overthink it. Then the breaking point broke again. On April 6th, I was at the Randall Davy Center for a site visit with our wedding coordinator. The wisteria trellis was finally leafing. My phone buzzed with a notification from my bank. An attempted withdrawal of $2,400 from the joint wedding account at 11:41 a.m. from a vendor called CV Prop LLC. I hadn't approved it. At 11:47, another $1,200. I walked into the shade and called the bank, verified myself and froze the account. The banker said the authorized user initiated these via web. I said, remove the authorized user. She did. She said, funds were still pending, will reverse. I took screenshots, circled the timestamps. The wind made little chimes out of the metal name tags for the native plants. My stomach made a tight little fist. When I got home, a manila envelope was propped against the door. Inside were printed screenshots of my texts to my sister about postponing the wedding, annotated in red pen, so manipulative, and classic Elena control move. Brandon had always teased me about being a document person. Now he was a document person too, in the worst way. The envelope also contained a receipt from a locksmith dated April 3rd at 6:22 p.m. For entry attempt, unsuccessful. He'd tried to hire someone to do in 30 minutes what my father taught me to do carefully over whole afternoons. I filed for a temporary order of protection on April 8th at the 1st Judicial District Court, 225 Montezuma Avenue. I brought the folder with the tabs. The judge, a man with a clean ring tan on his left hand, asked 3 questions. I answered plainly. The order was granted for 30 days, with a hearing set on May 6th. Service was effected on April 9th at 7:18 p.m. Brandon looked, the process server told me later, surprised and offended, like we'd interrupted dessert. He wrote me an email exactly 5 minutes later, so this is how you want to play it. He attached a PDF of a drafted agreement where I'd buy him out, of improvements he'd made to the cabin, $7,400 for sweat equity, $890 for staging materials, $1,200 for marketing. I printed it and wrote in pencil across the top, no. I kept the pencil line as steady as a roof line. The police called 3 days later with a neat sentence. We've opened a forgery investigation. Detective Ojeda said they'd requested records from the brokerage and the notary database. She said the broker had emailed under counsel that they'd been misled by the fiancé's representation. I sat with the phone pressed to my ear after she hung up and listened to the faint tick of the old wall clock my father rebuilt. It keeps good time if you wind it gently, never force it. When the hearing came, I wore a navy dress and low heels because I needed to feel the floor. Brandon wore a grey suit and the ring we'd chosen for him, which felt like a punch. He didn't look at me until the judge asked if there was any reason the order shouldn't be extended for a year. Brandon began with charm. He called me Elle. He said he was deeply sorry for miscommunications. He said he only wanted a secure future. He said the power of attorney was suggested by the agent, that he didn't read it closely, that maybe someone else filled it in. The judge tilted his head. Did you sign her name? Brandon swallowed. I might have initialed something. The judge raised his hand. Answer the question. Brandon said yes. The judge nodded slowly, as if the answer were a door he'd expected to open to that particular squeak. The order was extended to 1 year, expiring May 6, 2026. The aftermath was paperwork in the service of breath. I removed Brandon from our shared lease. The landlord was sympathetic and precise, requiring a new addendum and a $150 fee. I changed the locks again and kept all the new keys in a tin labeled nails. I moved my grandfather's fishing rod to the cabin and angled it across the rafters like a talisman. I returned deposits for vendors and cancelled our June date. The Randall Davy Center refunded 50%, the florist refunded 30%. The catering deposit was non-refundable, $1,750 gone, but the caterer offered to apply it to a future party. I called it a tax for exiting a mistake. The social circles untangled themselves. A few people apologized. One of Brandon's cycling friends, a woman named Caroline, sent a short note that said, "I'm sorry I didn't read the room at Lorena." Serena posted a story with a quote about parasites. I blocked her and moved on. I started going to a Tuesday night woodworking group hosted by a retired shop teacher named Tom in a garage off Old Pecos Trail. He charged $25 per night and a six-pack of something local. We hand-cut dovetails, we argued about finish, we listened to Steely Dan without irony. The fourth week, a tall man with a crooked smile joined, introduced himself as Lucas Meyer, 36 electrical engineer, fresh transfer from Boulder to Los Alamos National Lab, recently divorced, liked climbing the half-rotten ladders at the gym on St. Michael's. Lucas asked thoughtful questions about the way I held a chisel, not the way I held my life. He didn't ask about the cabin until he'd seen the way I sanded. When I told him a version of the story, he didn't offer therapeutic platitudes. He asked if I'd checked the lag screws on the porch posts and if I had a generator for the winter. He helped me replace the porch screen without comment. We listened to crickets and a barn owl and didn't narrate them. Then Brandon tried to be unforgettable one more time. On June 28th at 9:52 p.m., the trail cam pinged an image. His Audi nosed up to the gate, lights off. A figure got out and walked to the mailbox, which is really just a cedar box with a lid and a hinge that has more play than it should. The person slipped an envelope inside and left. At 10:18 p.m., a second notification. The envelope was gone, lid open. The next morning, I drove out with Lucas and opened the mailbox. Inside was a single Polaroid, Brandon standing in front of the cabin months earlier, hands up like a game show host introducing a prize. On the back in Sharpie, we could have had it all. There was nothing else, no threat, no demand, just that needy echo. I sent the photo to Detective Ojeda. She said, "Documented." She asked if I felt safe. I said yes, I did. Safety is partly locks and partly witnesses and partly the rhythm of your own lungs. Lucas installed a motion-activated floodlight above the porch. We set its sensitivity low so the moths wouldn't set it off all night. We joked about moth bills, six-legged lobbyists, and then we were quiet again. The final turn didn't feel like revenge. It felt like calibration. In August, I received a letter from the state. A notice that the notary commission number misused in the forged document had triggered a review. The brokerage had paid a fine for improper verification of identity. Brandon was under investigation for felony forgery. I didn't cheer. I did text Hannah a photo of the letter with a single caption, "Weights and measures." She wrote back a heart and a hammer emoji, which is both a rhyme and a mission. On September 12th, I hosted a cookout at the cabin. I used the catering credit as a joke on fate. Mini green chili sliders, charred corn, a salad with too much cilantro. Tom brought a hand plane as a gift and a bottle of Zinfandel. Hannah brought a portable speaker and a playlist she called Non-Wedding Bangers. Lucas brought a terracotta pot he'd made at the same studio where I'd met Brandon, stamped on the bottom with a small M. We ate on the porch under string lights and a pleasant swarm of insects. The night smelled like piñon and pepper. I thought about my father, who would have stood at the edge of the porch with his hands in his pockets like a farmer admiring weather. At 9:07 p.m., a coyote called and a second one answered. The conversation was brief and decisive. I've learned to like that kind of sentence, the kind the world says to itself when it doesn't know you're listening. A week later, a certified letter arrived. From an attorney representing the Denver buyer, demanding return of the $5,000 earnest money. I forwarded it to Benita with a short note. He never got it from me. She replied, "Already handled, brokerage refunded." She added a postscript, "You're doing great." I printed that too because part of surviving is remembering who told you the truth and who told you that you were smaller than you are. In October, I finally took down the wedding binder from the top shelf and emptied it like a boat, tucking the plastic sleeves into the recycling. At the bottom was my father's letter. "Keep it simple. Keep it yours." I put it in the tin with the keys. I won't pretend I became a different person. I didn't cut my hair or move to Paris or take up skydiving. I did, however, redo the cabin's tiny kitchen with measured care. A 24-inch gas range, a countertop I planned and finished with food-safe oil, shelves I leveled by eye and then by bubble. On a Saturday in November, Lucas and I drove out with a second-hand generator strapped into the Subaru like a child. We spent the afternoon rewiring the outlet by the stove and checking the ground, and when the lights came up in the early dusk, I felt a small practical joy that had nothing to do with grand gestures. Word came in January, the DA had filed a charge, there'd be an arraignment. Benita asked if I wanted to attend. I said no. Sometimes the best statement is the empty seat. Brandon emailed me once more, a paragraph that seemed designed to leak into pity. He said that missing me felt like quitting sugar and that he was really working on himself. He said he'd forget me in a week, and then he corrected himself. I hope I learn to. I read the line twice, not because it hurt, but because it felt like a copy of a copied apology, the toner running out. I closed my laptop and drove to the cabin. The first snow was a light sift that made everything look outlined in chalk. I brewed coffee on the stove. I tightened one of the hinge screws on the porch door. The floodlight clicked on as a deer moved through. Lucas arrived an hour later with a bag of bagels from a place in town that always burns the bottoms and swears they're New York authentic. We ate them anyway because imperfection has its own honest salt. He asked quietly if I planned to sell the cabin someday. I said maybe in 40 years when my hands shake too much to hold a plane, or maybe never. He nodded like a person who knows that maybe is a complete answer. He pointed at the corner where the baseboard didn't quite meet, a hairline gap you'd only notice if you lived there. We can fix that, he said. He said, then paused, ready to take it back if it landed wrong. We can, I said. The trick of the story is that nothing glamorous happens after the smoke clears. You check the locks, you pay the attorney, you file the papers and carry them back out to your car in a plastic envelope that keeps out both rain and false narratives. You learn which of your friends like dramatic gestures and which like casseroles. You keep receipts Home Depot 27, 44 for a new latch, REI 179 for a camera, Lowe's 89, 98 for locks, Castellanos Law 3000 for a boundary you could stack like bricks. You sleep. She said I'd forget him in a week, but I'm the one who forgot her.